Welcome, everybody, to episode 60 of Comic DNA, X edition number 4, on which my good friend Alex Harner and I, Aaron Walther, discuss the classic X-Men comics by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And as you would guess, according to the numerical title sequence, we are on issue number 4. Alex, you stuck around for 4 issues. I'm impressed.
Yeah. 3 got a little rocky, but there's been enough good stuff to keep me here.
I think, before we start talking about 4, the good stuff, largely you would agree with me when I say that it's the characterizations. The characters are fun, for the most part. I like... They're not boring characters. Except for that one villain in issue number 2. He was boring.
The Vanisher wasn't the most exciting character.
Right.
This is true.
Right.
But by and large, all of them have had moments to shine, and you can definitely see how Stan Lee and Jack Kirby are establishing the foundation for the characters that we know so well and continue to follow in the X-Men today.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of establishing the foundation, issue number 4 is... I don't know if it's sort of a big deal. I think we talked about 3. The big deal in 3 was that it really set the foundation for the character Beast. It really established who he was and who he would be pretty much forevermore.
Yeah, that's the first time we see Smart Beast.
Exactly, and that's the version that has existed for the last forever, since 1964. That's the version that everybody loves. For them, I mean, not counting the the blue fur or the cat face or the various superficial visual changes. His personality, that type of character, was set in stone from that issue number 3.
Right, absolutely.
And I mean, issue number 1, set the characters, and issue number 2 kind of established, really kind of helped establish, I think, the Danger Room sequences and Professor X a little bit more of him. As this powerful,
I think it reinforced that they are a school and that Xavier is the teacher, and he's also got some... There's a reason he's the teacher.
Yeah.
He's got some kind of next-level things going on.
Yeah, exactly. And 4 is... I guess it's kind of... the unique thing about 4 is that it's the first issue that's really... Well, I mean, what would you say? Continuity... recurring continuity, I guess you could say.
Right.
Because
Magneto returns, and he's got it.
Yeah. And he's got the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants with him.
I picked this one up to read it, and I was excited when I saw the cover. When I was like, this one's in the pile to read.
Yeah.
I was excited.
Yeah.
To see the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants' first appearance.
Yeah, number 4. So, we're still relatively new into the series already. And, I feel like the fourth issue is almost kind of early to introduce your kind of your recurring villain,
Yeah.
The previous 3 issues had done a good job of establishing kind of each issue you introduce a new villain, a new character. So the first issue was Magneto, the second issue was Vanisher, the third issue was Blob, and you kind of have this set structure of the X-Men are training to be a good team, and they encounter a new mutant, and they go to interact with them, try to get them to join the team, or stop them from blackmailing the government for tax-free money.
That tax-free money. That's the kind you want.
That's the sweet stuff. But I mean, 4 we just launch into the returning main, the arch enemy, Magneto. The cover boasts the return of the dreaded Magneto.
Right. He said he'd be back.
Yeah.
Here he is.
And here he is, just
he's got cronies.
3 months later, and he's built his own team.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess before we start, we've been beating around the bush a little bit here. As with the alternating schedule, since it's issue number 4, I think I'll do the plot summary if you don't mind, Alex.
You're up this time.
It's my turn. So fortunately, it's pretty straightforward actually.
Most of them are thus far.
That's true. I mean, the issue opens like every issue thus far which this is only the fourth issue, but every issue so far has opened with a Danger Room training sequence, and the X-Men
Mostly.
Yeah.
The X-Men doing something.
Yeah, doing something, yeah. And,
I had to double check this, actually.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. Issue 2 opens with them running.
Oh, that's right. The returning to the call. Yeah.
Yeah. But within a few pages there in the Danger Room.
But then they do a Danger Room sequence. Right. You're correct. But yeah, there's always a Danger Room sequence in every issue thus far.
Yes.
And most of the time it opens with it. But yeah, this one opens with it, and this sequence is, or I should say, this Danger Room is pretty thorough. More so than in previous ones, where I will note again that I've said in the past that I think Beast is Jack Kirby's favorite character to draw, and
I definitely get that.
Yeah, you definitely get that, because most of these sequences involve Beast in some way. Even when it's Iceman's turn to do his Danger Room sequence, Beast is involved and takes part in the training. So we get a whole training sequence, and then it ends kind of on this happy note where Marvel Girl's challenge is to open a box very carefully without disrupting any interior contents of the box, and then she lifts up the contents of the box, and it's a cake. And then
it's a birthday cake.
It's a birthday cake. It's actually a birthday cake, and they celebrate the 1-year anniversary of the X-Men being together, which that was a quick year across 4 issues.
Yeah.
But
I guess he's kind of hopping around a little bit.
True. And I actually have to double check. I don't know if this book was coming out monthly at the time, or if it was coming out bi-monthly, every other month. So I guess I could check the cover dates on the issues, but I'm not going to. But yeah, so the point is, it's been a year, and the X-Men are celebrating their yearly anniversary, and everybody's happy, and it's a really good scene. And then we immediately cut to a bunch of bitter, sour-faced mutants who are the polar opposites of the X-Men.
Bunch of jerks.
Just a bunch of jerks. And it's all characters that you I'm sure you recognized all of them, Alex, for the most part.
Yeah.
We see sitting around a table, we see Toad, Quicksilver, the Scarlet Witch, and Mastermind. I think Mastermind is the only one who would not be immediately recognizable necessarily here. I mean, of course, long-time readers of the X-Men will get it, but I mean, people who are just watching the movies, that's the character that's going to not really stick out.
Yeah, he's a little less. He's been used less in recent popular X-Men fiction.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Toad had a big part in the first movie. Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, of course, have had long careers in the Avengers and the X-Men. So, but yeah, Mastermind is kind of the character who's been around. I'd say he's an important character in X-Men continuity and X-Men history, but he wouldn't be immediately recognizable the way these other characters would.
Right.
And I'm kind of getting away from my initial plot synopsis here, so I'm gonna get back on track.
We'll return to the
We'll get back to that. But anyway, so they basically spend a few pages fighting with each other because they're all jerks. They're not good people the way the X-Men are good people, and they keep debating about what's going to happen when their leader shows up. And then of course the leader shows up, and he is the mighty Magneto. And
Magneto.
Sorry, I got away. Yeah, I made my promise. Magneto.
I'm going to say Magneto.
That's fine.
You were committed to that issue.
Issue 1.
Podcast 1.
I like Magneto. It just sounds funny. But anyway, so Magneto has a nefarious plan where he hijacks a ship, like a battleship, and he and his Brotherhood of Evil Mutants launch an attack on a small republic off the coast of South Africa or South America.
I think it's South America.
South America. It's South America. You're right. I don't know where I got Africa from.
It's Santa Monica.
Yeah, Santa Monica. That's South America for sure. So, yeah, they launch their attack, and Professor X has a brief mental confrontation with Magneto, where they kind of lay out their basic philosophies, the foundation of their whole like their quarreling nature, if you will.
Yeah.
And we'll talk more about that in the future. But
Oh yeah.
basically, Magneto and the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants take over this tiny island republic and set up like basically just like a dictatorship where Magneto just sets himself up as the despot for. There's not an immediate reason other than he just wants to rule humans, and so this is the first step of his plan to take over the world, is to take over, Santa Monaco. And then
Marco.
yeah, Santa Marco, yeah. And then the X-Men show up and they fight, and they have to try and break through Magneto's castle stronghold where he's set up.
Mm-hmm.
And they fight the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, and Magneto decides that they're not necessarily going to defeat them, so he sets up a bomb to just blow up the island, and they're going to leave and just kill everybody. Nuclear bomb, yeah.
No less.
No,
yes.
yeah. I mean, it's serious business. Sets up the nuclear bomb, and everybody's fighting. Magneto leaves. The Brotherhood of Evil Mutants leave, but fortunately, not all
twist.
of the little plot twist there. Not all of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants are strictly evil, because our character that we know and love from 2 different Marvel movies, Quicksilver. Oh, I'm sorry, 3. He was in that Apocalypse movie, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He's been in the character.
I'm losing track.
Not the actor. The character has appeared in 3 different Marvel movies. Quicksilver. Mm-hmm. Quickly runs back and defuses the nuclear bomb and then leaves again so that they can all escape. But it kind of almost ends on a little bit of a cliffhanger where Professor X is he tells the X-Men to leave him behind because he's been hurt too badly in the previous confrontation. He can't use his mental powers.
Yeah.
And that's just sort of the end of it. So it's I'll say this. First impressions. I'm just going to jump ahead of you, Alex. First impressions. This issue feels a little different than the previous 3 issues.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't feel like the standard one and done style. Like I said, the villain of the week that the previous issues had done. This feels like it's really settling into like some serious continuity character drama.
Yeah. Feels like the stakes are a little higher.
Yeah, nuclear.
A little more
bombs.
going on.
Yeah. I mean, I guess to be fair, the first issue, Magneto was, trying to set off rockets and like he was essentially trying to start world wars. But
sure.
So that's how they start, and but that is a little different than the stakes of the previous 2 issues, where the Vanisher was just blackmailing people, the government, and Blob was just a big jerk who didn't want to join the X-Men.
Right.
This one feels so. I'm going to let you go off here in a second, Alex, but I will say that first impressions. I didn't think this was like a fantastic issue, but it felt like the X-Men, like classic X-Men. Even the plot, like it felt like the broad strokes were there. You had the character motivations were really solid. I think that's important because we talked about issue 3. The character motivations made no sense. None of the characters, like it was just weird and bad, and the character, like Professor X, looked awful. Like he didn't look like he wasn't a good guy,
Right.
This one, it kind of got back to the roots of. I mean, you have that panel where Magneto and Professor X are having their mental debate, and it's all laid out on the line right there, where Magneto says, you're the only one that can stop me from taking over humanity. And why would you, you're a mutant too. We should be ruling them. And Professor X makes his grandstand, and he wants to save mankind, and they should work together to create a utopia. It's all there in the comic. It's really grandiose, but it's really in line with these big themes like that has held up and been the foundation for what we think of the X-Men today.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've kind of rambled on a little bit about that. Alex, what was your first impression of reading this issue?
It felt very classic X-Men. I agree.
Hmm.
Um, I I'd say I really liked like 2/3 of it.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, I mean, like I think the setup's great. It's like a classic Magneto story.
Uh-huh.
You get the ideologies clashing. Some cool fights between the different mutants. Like
Hmm.
I think by and large really strong, but I feel like Magneto's his reasons for what he does start out kind of straightforward enough, and then it
Yeah.
kind of feels like he gets shortchanged, and it's kind of rushed, and suddenly he's gonna nuke the island,
Right. Yeah.
and it's kind of like okay.
Yeah.
Um, Again, it's it's this mix of like depth and like also it's a kids comic.
Yeah. Exactly.
So like there are little things that are like, oh, I can see how they ran with that and how that became so beloved and how that has been used so many times. And there are other things where I'm like, and then they had to wrap it up, so they came up with sort of a
Right.
goofy plot device and it was done.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. There's like a page where Magneto takes over the island, and then like Mastermind uses an illusion to scare the islanders into thinking there's this giant army, and then the next
Yeah.
page it's like, now that Magneto has seized the reins of government, he loses no time in forming a real army modeled after the imaginary one, and it's just like we're just cutting, like we're just skipping ahead of huge swaths of time where there's
Sure.
infrastructure here that is just
Right.
created out of nowhere.
And even that, honestly, even that didn't bother me a ton. I mean, it's moving at a crazy pace. You're
Yeah.
like, okay,
Yeah, how
I
much
guess
time has
I'm gonna
passed
do
here?
this.
Yeah.
Right. But then you like hop ahead, and you kind of have that same problem that came up with like the Vanisher and
Hmm.
less so the Blob, where the X-Men go to the island and they're just kind of allowed in,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'm like, what's what's the villain planning here? Why is this?
Yeah. Why are the
Is this
X-Men
just
allowed in?
hubris again? Is it just like mustache twirling? Ha! And now my greatest foes will come. Let them come, and we'll have our.
Well,
I mean,
like I'm gonna go ahead and just attribute it to Stan Lee, but
Mhm.
Stan and Jack, they both like they try to add that little moment where the X-Men are in civilian clothes driving into the island, like they're going through a
Right.
checkpoint, and it's an American professor and some students on a goodwill visit from America, which I have to assume that an island republic that has been taken over by a terrorist, they're just like not going to be allowing immigration at all. Like that's just like
You wonder.
that's just out, right? But
Right.
but then there's the weird thing where the guard has this thought bubble where he has specific orders to admit those visitors. The leader
Right.
feels that they can be fooled into thinking he is a kind and beloved ruler. So there's this weird thing where like you're trying to figure out what Magneto's, according to this, the story in the comic, what is Magneto's plan here? Like, is he's like you could look at that and I could say like if I were writing this issue, for example, I would look
Mhm.
at this and say like, what's Magneto's motivation? He still thinks he can convince Xavier to join him. That would be like that's his motivation for getting the X-Men on the island. It's
Hmm.
you could say it's hubris. You could say it's like he's so convinced that he is right and that Xavier is wrong, and he thinks that he can convince the X-Men to join him, and then they can't, or he can't, and then the X-Men fight him. But there's really
Mhm.
none of that later on. Later on, it's just, oh, the X-Men are here. We have to defeat them and kill them. And there's
Right.
there's no sense of like, I let you on the island so that I could show you how great we can be if you just join me. There's none of that like
Right.
follow through there. So that's
Right.
where it feels like in the like again, I can't help but read these issues thinking in terms of how they were created and what Jack was
Mhm.
thinking when he drew them versus what Stan was thinking when he scripted them after the art was delivered. And I
Sure.
I have to look at this and think like in Jack's mind, it's a simple story for kids. The X-Men sneak onto the island. it's a professor and some kids. That's their secret identities. That's the whole point. That they're superheroes. They have secret identities. So they sneak in, then they put on their costumes and they fight. But Stan, I guess rightfully thinks like that's too simple. We got to make this, got to add a little something extra here.
Right.
And he adds that dialogue bubble of the soldier saying that he was specifically instructed to let them in. But then none of that is followed through in the actual story because that's not the story that Jack was telling.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Maybe,
it's really interesting.
Maybe I'm reaching, but that's what I can't help thinking about when I read this.
Yeah. Well, it's like, I think there's something to that. Like, I mean, Stan Lee was a writer, so he's trying to, even if it is ham-fisted and terrible sometimes, he's trying to spice it up with a little drama via the words that he's putting down.
Yeah.
So that there are bits where it seems like he's trying to imply that there's more going on, but it's not what Jack Kirby drew per se, so it never gets developed.
Right. We talked about that in the previous issue, about how, like, in the art, in the story, you can see the setup with Marvel Girl having to train her, the dexterity of her powers, and that is followed through later in the issue when it's a life or death situation and she has to use the dexterity of her powers to save everybody. That is something that was obviously there from the beginning of the story. Like, that's what Jack drew. That was the story that he was telling when he drew the comic.
Mm-hmm.
When Stan Lee, in the third issue, the previous episode we talked about, when Stan Lee added the dialogue bubble of Professor X being in love with Jean Grey, that was clearly not backed up in the art. That had nothing to do with any of the story. That was just something that was added in the dialogue, added in the words, and it really was never... Like, that's what makes it feel like so disconnected from the story. And I get that same feeling from this panel of the soldier saying, we've got to let him in so that they can be fooled. First of all, fooled into thinking. Like, it's this weird level of trickery going on there. Like, why?
Right.
Like, why would Magneto let him in if he was specifically trying to trick them? Like, it would make more sense if he was letting them in because he honestly believed they could be converted.
Right. Right.
What? I don't know. It's weird. It's some weird wording, and again, it's not backed up in the art, in the story, in any way.
I mean, it is established early on that, like, Magneto and Professor Xavier, they're arch enemies. Magneto knows Xavier is coming.
Yeah.
So, the implication in this little bit where they're in civilian clothes in the car is that ties into that. This is a part of his bigger plan.
Yeah.
But then, as you said, it's never followed up on. So,
but
I have to think that's a result of the writing process and the art process.
Yeah, I agree. Just the whole like separation of the writing and art, the drawing, the arting and the writering.
I like that.
But I will say, I guess we should be careful not to jump the gun too much, because this issue doesn't really, like, as we said earlier, doesn't really end with a happy ending, tie the bow around the story, move on to the next one. Like, this issue clearly is going to lead into the next issue. And although I would say it's still a complete story, like, it's a complete story within the issue, it is different than the previous issues where it's also clearly moving into the next one. Like, there are things that this issue ends with certain situations that are clearly going to be plot points in the next issue, which was not the case in the previous issues that we read. Absolutely.
You get to the end and justice has not been served.
Exactly. Yeah, I guess that's a good.
I don't know if justice was served in issue 3, but there's no sense of closure of right overcoming wrong. And the only reason that they get to the end is because Quicksilver helps them.
Yeah, if it wasn't exactly, they were going to lose completely. If it hadn't been for Quicksilver defecting, essentially, the X-Men would have blown up in a nuclear blast. And that would have been the end of it.
Right. That feels very different than the previous issues. Like, just tonally.
Tonally, very, very different. But I like we're talking, like, comparing it to the previous 3 issues we read. I will say it does feel like the X-Men. You
Oh yeah.
know what I mean? Like it feels like this issue really does kind of feel like it fits in with the classic mythology, which is something we've talked about, I think, on previous issues, on how these, our previous
Mm-hmm.
episodes, on how these issues fit into the greater
Mm-hmm.
mythology of what we think of as sort of like the avatar of the X-Men, like what it represents. And this issue
Mm-hmm.
certainly feels just completely in line with that.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very, I mean, based on the other X-Men comics that I've read, and I think we both got into the X-Men with the X-Men cartoon in the early '90s.
That would be the
Am I right?
largest. Yeah, that would be the largest influence. I honestly cannot remember if I read comics before the cartoon. Like that's how young
Okay.
I was. Like
Mm-hmm.
I know I read comics at a very young age. Like I've had
Mm-hmm.
comics with me my entire life since before I can remember whether or not I had comics.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, the cartoon would have certainly been like the largest. Like the cartoon would have been more readily available than comics. Like
Okay.
as a young child whose memories I can't remember, I wouldn't have been going to the comic shop regularly, but I would have been
Right.
watching the
Right.
TV regularly.
Okay. Well, my point being that starting with the cartoon and the X-Men comics I read after that growing up, this rings very true to the Magneto stories I was familiar with.
Yes.
Even as a reader who started reading comics in the '90s, like the Magneto sort of wins.
Mm-hmm.
The stakes are high. Our heroes are kind of they're broken down, and then they have to come back. And it's part of what makes Magneto stories cool because Magneto's formidable.
Yeah.
And it adds a little more, I don't know, gravitas to the stories.
Yeah.
They would seem a little grimmer.
I think the only thing, kind of going with what you're saying there, the only thing really missing from this compared to like these other classic Magneto stories would be that sympathetic angle that
Sure.
that you have for
Okay.
Magneto. Like and this is sort of like the
Yes.
thing that Grant Morrison always talked about, like in his new X-Men. Like in the
I was
original
thinking of
X-Men,
that.
yeah, in the original X-Men stories, Magneto was just a huge jerk. Like he was just evil.
I think
like
he used the term daft old terrorist twat at one point.
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah, he's a daft old terrorist twat. Like he just wants to rule the world because he just thinks he's superior. Like, and I mean,
Sure.
I guess you could say by his own measure he is superior. He is a mutant. He has powers that regular humans don't. And by that, by that unit of measurement, how he's measuring people,
Mm-hmm.
living beings, he is superior. Therefore, he's completely morally justified in everything he does. But
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't have that layer that you get from the Claremont era,
Right.
where Magneto
Yeah.
himself was a victim of previous
Right.
like supremacist movements. So
Right. You suddenly understand like why he's so damaged, why he
exactly, yeah,
lashes out.
exactly, and I'll just say this: I love that angle for Magneto. I think it's perfect for the character, and I think it rings like just emphatically true to reality. Like it's just too real. You like the whole
why
thing
he's
of like,
a beloved character, yeah.
well, yeah, exactly. Like the whole thing about how bullies are often bullied. Like that's
Sure.
like it's this whole cycle of violence, and the Magneto story fits into that perfectly. Yeah, but you don't have that angle in these issues. In these issues,
No.
he's just,
He just thinks he's better than
he just
everybody
thinks
else.
he's better than everybody else. And to be fair, again, this we talked about this with Beast in the previous issue, how like the addition of Beast's academic intellectualism doesn't negate what came before. It just is a nice building on top of what it is. And I
Right.
feel like Claremont's like sympathetic origins for Magneto, they don't really negate anything that's going on in these issues. It's just a nice like extra layer to the character that's added on to it, and it completely fits. Like it's still like tonally, these stories still work and they make sense, even if you look back at them and say like, oh, he was a victim of the Holocaust. It doesn't. It doesn't really. I mean, it maybe changes how you look at these issues. Like maybe makes you sympathize more with Magneto, but you don't start to question his motivations for why he's doing the things that he does. Like it still fits. It's completely in line for the story. So, but yeah, I guess if you're looking at these issues like strictly just what's in the issue. Magneto is just a supremacist, a mutant supremacist, and he just wants to take over because it's his divine right as a powerful mutant.
Sure. He deserves it. He's better.
Exactly, yeah. But I do think, like, even though like we're talking now, we're kind of talking pretty heady concepts, future X-Men, past X-Men, the greater mythology. I will say, despite the fact that, like, we're talking about how this doesn't have the sympathetic Magneto, this issue does lay down that foundation, that yin and yang struggle between Professor X and Magneto.
Yeah.
Of how Magneto wants to just completely rule humans, and Professor X feels like that mutants don't have the right to rule humans,
Right.
and that they can work together and live in harmony. This is the classic civil rights argument laid out right here on one page, and it's kind of moving. It's really smartly written, and we've been dogging on Stan Lee a little bit for his writing. Excuse me. We've been dogging on Stan Lee a little bit for his writing in previous issues. I mean, like we especially about the Professor X being in love with Jean Grey.
Misstep.
That's a little awkward, but I mean, he nails the Professor X Magneto dichotomy. Like
he does
these panels.
But
yeah. Oh, go ahead.
But he's also working with some fantastic art from Jack Kirby.
It really is.
It really. It's so epic.
It's incredible. Yeah, I was gonna say that. So let's. I don't want to take away a little bit too much from us talking about how Stan Lee nails the dialogue and nails kind of the big concepts, but let's talk a little bit about the art, because this issue bothers me so much. Because in some places, I think that the art is just, I don't know. It feels claustrophobic for Jack Kirby. Like, it feels like it's really rushed and a little sloppy in a few places. But I'm willing to say that might not be Kirby's fault, and it might just be some really, really dirty inking.
Okay.
Like some of these panels, like the coloring is really bad. And again, of course, you can't blame Kirby for the coloring. But like,
all right,
like,
there's some
I'm
misaligned colors here and there.
Exactly. Like, I'm not throwing that one on Kirby. I'm just saying, like, overall, the final product, like, some of these panels look, I would say, just really sloppy. But that being said, you have some of the most incredible panels. Like, there's some really great art here. And that specific scene of the Professor X Magneto, ideology conflict, where they're meeting on, like, the astral plane, and it's
they're doing psychic battle, and, like, the Earth is in the background.
Yeah, and you got the Kirby dots everywhere, and there's the psychic projections, like, on giants on the. Oh, it's incredible! Like, those panels are great, and it's like, that's that synchronicity between Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. You look at these panels, and you're like, you can see that, and be like, this will change comics, like, as an art form. This is what people look back on and see, like, the true beauty in comic books, comic art, comic literature as high art, not just cheap pop art. I really believe that. Like, these panels are incredible, and it all just works really well. Like you said, Stan Lee had some really great art to work with.
Yeah, just that whole sequence it reads really well. The whole like you said, they're doing battle on the astral plane, kind of like this outer space above the Earth, these ghostly forms, and they're talking about like this is the mission statement of the X-Men. This is like the highest purpose of Xavier, and like the conflict that has driven the entire series for
exactly like the
going on 60 years or however many years.
The entire purpose of the mythology of the franchise, of this giant billion-dollar franchise, could be summed up in that one panel. Like, that's it. It's all right there. It's great.
Pretty cool. I like the cut to when he's waking up too.
Yeah.
So he's in this like psychic trance, and then it cuts to a close up on his face, and it's very pop arty.
Yeah.
Like it's like a Liechtenstein painting. Like, it's super close up on his face, and he's yelling. Mankind must be saved.
Yeah, it's great. That actually that was one thing I did want to bring up, was that the different ways that Professor X has been depicted, over the years, different artists. Some artists he is a bit more of like a fatherly figure, and we kind of talked about our first impressions. Was it in the first issue, maybe the second issue? How like this old Jack Kirby Professor X, he's kind of this like ornery old taskmaster, where he's got those eyebrows, those piercing eyes, and nobody,
Yul Brynner intensity.
Yeah, exactly, that Yul Brynner intensity. And I'll tell you what, no artist does the close up of Professor X's eyes the way Jack Kirby does, with those eyebrows and the piercing blue eyes that look like they're staring right into your soul. He totally sells it.
The fact that there's white above and below the pupil, like
exactly,
makes it look extra crazed.
Yeah, exactly. Like he does. Like I don't know if any other artist has really sold it like that. Like that's I think that is something that Jack Kirby brought to the X-Men that no other artist has really delivered on. Is his depiction of Professor X. I'm not setting myself up as an expert of the X-Men. I'm sure there are some other artists out there who have, at least imitated Jack Kirby's Professor X. But, off the top of my head, that like the top artists that everybody thinks of associated with the X-Men, Professor X is not regularly depicted this way, I don't think.
No, Kirby seems to have more of a kind of like a radical strangeness to him.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't know, like you said, fatherly is how he is under certain depictions, and he's weird, and part of that is because issue 3 was especially weird, and it's unfortunate that issue 3 happened.
It really is.
I wish we could just throw that one out.
Because
even without it, like he has an intensity and like we said, a taskmaster, and he has this kind of like it reminds me of old Twilight Zones where there's like an alien who's like in disguise yes. and he's like he wants to bring peace and goodness to the world, but they just can't understand.
Yeah.
Like there's something odd about him.
Yeah.
I really like it.
I love it too, because I like that Professor X is weird like that. Like he's not, because they're supposed to be mutants. They're all supposed to be weird. And all the other mutants have these, all the other characters have these obvious mutations. And I like that Professor X's weirdness just comes from almost his acting, not necessarily, like he doesn't have a physical deformity, like he doesn't have, wings or, like he doesn't have like a weird obvious deformity. He just something about
his eyebrows.
It's his
eyebrows. The way he emotes.
Yeah. Like he looks human, but he's not human, and that just makes him unsettled. Like it's almost like Uncanny Valley effect.
Okay.
Where he's like human but not, and it's really bothering me. Like
something about that guy.
Like on a base subconscious root level, you can just tell that he's just off.
Mm-hmm.
But there's nothing overtly wrong with him. He looks like a human being.
Right.
But those eyes. I love
piercing.
It. Yeah, exactly. Those eyes, those piercing eyes. It's great. I do really like that the Jack Kirby Professor X, and this issue is full of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that it has that going for it.
I agree.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about we've talked a lot about Professor X. We talked a little bit about his ideological differences with Magneto. Let's talk about Magneto's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants.
Yeah. I was excited to meet them in this issue.
Yeah, I mean, fourth issue, a pretty standard, a stable of the X-Men mythology, the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. They've gone through different leaders and different members throughout the many decades since they've appeared, but they're pretty much the go-to, the mirror opposite of the X-Men, if you will.
Yeah.
And that's exactly how they're set up in this issue. Like I alluded to in the plot outline, we transition directly, in the middle of the page, we transition directly from the X-Men being happy and getting along to the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants all, like, staring at each other suspiciously, and
Right.
they're all uncomfortable and they're bickering with each other.
Although it is kind of funny in previous issues, there's been a number of bickering arguments between Iceman and Beast, and
That's right.
kind of back and forth, but it's generally playful. And then we see these guys, and it's kind of the same thing. But they're just like meaner.
But it's not.
They're
as
less
playful.
pleasant.
Yeah, they're less pleasant, and that's what I was thinking. Like it is just set up to be, it's like the X-Men, but they're bad guys and not good guys.
Right.
So they're all,
Right.
they're all jerks, and they cross the line a little bit in a few places.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all kind of like, they all clearly have their own motivations, and they all suspect each other. Like they're all on guard at all times.
Right.
But
maybe making evil as like part of their title and their mission statement. Maybe it's a little too strong. Maybe they need a little more cohesion,
yeah, exactly.
unity.
I think that's a misstep on Magneto's part, and I guess we just have to accept that as being a product of the times.
Yeah.
If the X-Men,
it's hard to have brotherhood when you're evil, but
exactly, yeah.
it's a kid's comic.
It's a kid's comic, so if the X-Men are the heroes, the antagonists are the villains, and that means they're evil. I mean, we are still in the era of the Comics Code Authority, which is almost single-handedly responsible for destroying the comic book medium in America as we know it. But that's a different podcast. And we'll just gloss right over that. But
Okay.
but yeah, it's a little it's kiddish, the way it's presented. I mean, the way they're all trying, like they're all bad guys, and
Sure.
there are some good things done. The one thing that I cannot forgive, and this actually makes it more childish than anything to me, is that the way they try to like suspend the reader with the reveal of who the leader of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants is.
Okay.
And I cannot stand the dialogue where all the characters have like
the leader.
Yeah,
The
they have a
leader.
they have a 2-page conversation where they're all talking about the leader, and they keep saying the leader instead of his freaking name, which is Magneto, who they all know who he is. It's not like he's a secret. It's not like they're like, we've all been gathered here by a mysterious person, we don't know who he is, and I don't trust you and you don't trust me, and don't push me, like there's not that edge. Like they all know, like it's just, when our leader gets back, you'll be sorry. And then for a very cheap reveal for the next page to be like, oh, who is this leader that they're talking about? It's Magneto. Like it bothers me.
Did you think
so
though
much.
the way they kept referring to him as the leader, it gave him sort of a culty dictator vibe?
Well, I can agree that it did.
I mean, what do you think was intentional?
I don't know if it was intentional, but yeah,
Okay.
I just think of. I mean, to be fair, you and I are both just thinking of that Simpsons episode where Homer's obsessed with the leader.
No, leader. Yes, that was the first thing I thought of,
Yeah.
and then I thought of North Korea, and granted, this,
the deer leader. Yeah,
before that, but
right. But I'm willing to bet that it's probably just childish writing. But beyond that, I will sort of excuse that as just it's a kid's comic. It's a slippery slope when you start making exceptions and excuses for what qualifies as good. But then we're talking about can you enjoy something that's kitschy or not, and I don't want to go down that road. So
okay.
So I will say that although I really just had to roll my eyes profusely at all the leader talk, I do basically like how they set up the character interactions between the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. I especially liked. I mean, like Mastermind really didn't get any. Like he's just there. He's a jerk. He's an evil mutant. That's why he's there. Like he's evil.
Right. Well, he's evil guy number 2.
Yeah, he's the number 2. Yeah, and Toad. Toad's
a toady.
Like he's just a big suck up. And then like their motivations are pretty surface level, and I can
Mhm.
accept that those are characters that probably don't have deeper motivations. Some people are just jerks. Some people
Mhm.
are just you know malevolent masterminds, if you will.
Okay.
And then you have characters like Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch who are given a little bit of backstory, and I actually think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're really interesting characters, and
Hmm.
it creates this team of five is kind of compelling.
It
Want to know
is. It
more?
is. I actually really love that they go out of their way to establish that Scarlet Witch is, she's a mutant. She's from Europe somewhere. They just
One of those
yeah,
one of
just
those
the heart,
small
a small village in the
European.
heart of Europe. Yeah,
I don't know when Europe got like high-speed trains and became modernized, but
right.
in Stanley's world, it
It wasn't in the
everyone had
60s.
pitchworks and like donkeys in
Well, I
Europe.
mean, it's the Dracula story. You go into a certain village in Europe, and they're all talking about the crazy superstitions of the Dracula that lives in the castle on the mountain,
Right.
and that's our situation here. And you have Scarlet Witch who's about to be killed by villagers because she's a witch. Standard, mutant, and like I'll just go ahead and say it. This is kind of my go-to, but it's the basic Nightcrawler origin,
Right.
and but she is saved by Magneto. He protects her, and so she pledges her life to him, and she feels she owes him a debt. And Quicksilver is her brother, and although he doesn't necessarily like Magneto, he doesn't like Magneto's evil nature, so to speak. But he also doesn't
Mhm.
like humans because they tried to
Doesn't
kill her
really care
sister.
for. Right.
Yeah, he doesn't like Magneto. He thinks Magneto goes too far, but he also doesn't really like humans because they tried to kill his sister. So he's just kind of this independent, like I hate everybody and everybody sucks, and I'm gonna go along with this out of respect for my sister. It's
Hmm.
it's actually really really well done. Like it's some really
Yeah.
well established character motivation. Like I think it's
Right.
fantastic.
Yeah. And then he steps up in the end, and you're like, man, I hope they get through to him.
Exactly.
He
Like
could be
there's
saved.
that moment. Yeah, there's that moment where Quicksilver he's not really a bad guy, but don't be confused. He is a jerk. Uh, but I mean, as we've established in these 4 issues, almost all these characters are jerks. Cyclops is a jerk. Professor X is a jerk. Uh,
Angel's a jerk.
Angel is the biggest jerk. Oh my god,
Iceman's a brat.
he's a brat. Yeah. Marvel Girl, she's not a jerk. She is
Marvel
lovely.
Girl's nice. Everybody
Everybody
likes
loves
Marvel
her.
Girl. Beast is becoming nice. He
He
started out.
is. He started
I don't
out
know if he
kind
was
of
a jerk
brutish.
to start, but he
He
was rough around the edges.
he was I would say he's brutish, or he was
Yeah.
brutish. He was kind of a brute, and now he's softened a little,
I
and
was kind of sophisticated.
he's sophisticated. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm really impressed with that they went to the lengths they did to establish the origins for the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Even just just for Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. Like, it's clear why those are the characters. Again, like I talked about how readers of this book would recognize Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch instantly.
Hmm.
Like more so than Mastermind, and you would probably recognize Toad. But it's clear why they went on to be, the recurring characters that they did, because they have some well-established motivations. They're likable characters, even though they're not, like instantly, like they're not like necessarily heroic characters, but
Hmm.
they have like a moral foundation that you understand through the story that's told here, and
Yeah.
it's again, it is good storytelling.
Yeah. It's a, we've had a lack of compelling villains this far as well.
We have, and
So
I
it's
think that's
refreshing. It's
yeah,
like, oh, finally we're getting
yeah. I mean,
some meat to the bad
the
guys.
Vanisher was just a bank robber who was trying to blackmail the government, and the Blob. I mean, the Blob was almost 100% justified in everything he did because Professor X was trying to wipe his memory, and the Blob technically, like even from my moral standings, the Blob really never did anything morally wrong. Like, like
Yeah,
The closest you could say is
just
that
kind of a
he
slob.
tried to take over the circus. Like when he found out he was a mutant, he tried to strong arm control over the circus. And I'm like, okay, well, you don't really have the right to do that. Like you're a jerk. But like, you could argue that he was just doing it because Professor X was going to come and get him, which he
Right,
was.
right. It wasn't like the X-Men weren't chasing him and trying to wipe his mind.
Exactly.
So I
So,
don't know if it justifies stealing the circus from the circus manager, but
right. I
the
mean,
whole
but
issue's a
then,
mess.
yeah, because even if that is the case, the two wrongs don't make a right. So, I mean, just because the Blob was a jerk doesn't mean just because the Blob was wrong and trying to take over the circus doesn't mean it had no relation to Professor X wanting to wipe his memory and, and completely, uh,
Yeah.
violate his personal being. So, yeah, I agree. I wish we could just forget that issue because
Need to wipe that one from the.
yeah,
Yeah.
because there's some solid character stuff going on in this issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I like it. I would say that I probably liked the Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver stuff more than any of the X-Men stuff.
Yeah, because they're conflicted, and you want to see them saved. You want to see them redeemed, because there's goodness in them.
Yeah, clearly. I mean,
And there's goodness in the X-Men too, obviously, but they're sort of they're pretty white bread.
they're pretty white bread. Yeah.
Pretty white bread. There's just apart from that Professor X.
Yeah, exactly. I guess apart from Professor X and his suspicious actions.
Right. But the Angel and Iceman I find to be pretty kind of cliche, easy characters.
Yeah.
They're just kind of there to add some I don't know, some excitement to the interpersonal dynamics. But they're just not.
They're the
nothing
weakest,
has been revealed about them so
yeah,
far to
they're
make
the
me
weakest
be like,
members of the team. Yeah.
right. Cyclops has his dread power.
Dread power, yes.
Beast is getting likable because he's starting to show this intellect that's quirky, and Kirby likes to draw him in a really interesting way. Jean Grey is kind of just the girl, but her powers are cool. So
yeah, and
it's kind of weak so far, but
there's a little bit of focus though. There is kind of this repeated focus on how powerful she is. Like there is like the seeds are planted for why you can see why in the future like a guy like Claremont would pick up on that and turn her into the dominatrix, a powerful woman character.
Claremont liked the dominatrix thing.
He did. I certainly I won't judge man for that, but she has it's a powerful ability, like telekinesis, and there is that scene in this issue where the who is it? Which characters? Cyclops and Angel and Iceman are trying to break into the castle, and then all the axe and the sword and the spear, all the weapons come flying at them, and they're like, Angel is like, if I didn't know any better, I'd suspect this was Marvel Girl doing this, and then it is Marvel Girl because her and Beast were on the other side, and they thought that it was Magneto's people attacking them. So there is kind of this establishment of like she was single-handedly fighting off Cyclops and Iceman and Angel. Like, it was 1 versus 3, and she was keeping them at bay. So there is this kind of repeated this little thing going in the background about how like her ability is really strong and the potential is there.
I agree. I think I misspoke. I don't want to say the characters as established are not interesting.
Well,
I think Angel and Iceman are kind of boring.
Yeah.
But I think Beast, Cyclops, Jean Grey, and Xavier, there's been a lot thrown out with them to build on.
Yes. Yes.
But I like that that Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch are conflicted.
Me too.
And there's that desire to see them redeemed, brought over to the side of good.
Right. I mean, there's the whole conflict of the issue is Magneto saying he's going to set up the bombs and Quicksilver questioning him, and he's the one who says, what about all the innocent people that will be killed? like none of the other characters. Mastermind doesn't care about innocent people getting killed. He's an evil mutant. He embraces it.
Mhm.
So like there is that sense, yeah, like you said, that like moral gray area for Quicksilver, and by extension maybe a little bit Scarlet Witch. Like there's that confliction, and just the fact that it's there in any of the villains is, I think it's kind of a big deal. I mean, it's what made the Marvel books so good. That the villains weren't one note villains.
Right.
You had two note villains, and that's more than one note.
That's like one more note.
Yeah, it's a whole extra note. And sure, in our heady 21st century, 60 years later, sophisticated era now, we can look at this.
I read The Watchmen.
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. I have had multiple decades of Alan Moore comics. I know what complex, conflicted characters look like. But there's a beauty to what's going on in this issue, the way the characters are presented. And it definitely is in contrast to a lot of other comics that were being made at the time. I think that cannot be understated.
I agree.
Mm.
I agree. Sorry.
No, I don't know. I'm afraid of just harping on it for too long, because I don't know how much else, what else I could say about it, other than it's done really well. And clearly that was the thing that stuck out the most to me and you, because it's pretty much the only thing we've been talking about, as opposed to all the other characters. The X-Men characters did all kind of have a scene devoted to them, like displaying their powers. And I
think Kirby does a good job of making space for
they all have their moment.
cool panels.
Beast is climbing up the castle walls, and he has to fight Toad and Mastermind, and Angel's flying around avoiding machine gun fire, and
as he does.
That's pretty much like what his
he
power
avoids
was.
things.
Yeah, that's what he does.
Yeah. Although
he even defeats Quicksilver.
Yeah.
Because
I thought that was kind of weak.
Yeah, it was a little weak. His maneuverability. Quicksilver's too fast and he runs into a wall.
Wah, 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 wah. I thought there were some kind of fun, simplified panels of a few of the characters that just kind of they're very iconic.
Yeah.
Like they page 14 at the bottom, Angels is dodging bullets.
Yeah.
And it's a simple panel with a red background, but it's like a very it's if I were a little kid, I'd be copying that picture.
Exactly. It looks like a Liechtenstein piece. Like it's the kind of pop art like that.
Yeah,
that
simplified, very posterized. It would look good blown up as a big image.
Yep.
Likewise, on page 18, Cyclops gets one where he's doing like the full optic blast. It's pretty cool looking.
I was gonna actually say that. Like I liked that Cyclops panel. Like
cool.
I like Cyclops. I think he's a good visual, and I think he's a great character who has not been used well for the majority of his existence. But that's a different discussion. But I do love when you get a cool Cyclops panel. And I think Kirby really sells Cyclops and his optic blasts. Probably more so in this issue than he did in the previous issue, where Cyclops blasted the elephant, which we both agreed just felt. Just look at this page where Cyclops busts into the castle and he blasts the two guards.
They're like spinning in these like cylinders of motion.
They're tumbling, and everybody's like scared of him because wherever he looks, you just get punched in the face. And it's like, where was this dynamic to those panels where he was shooting the elephant? Like it was. This seems.
Well, the panel is too small.
That's
like
what
he's
I'm saying,
allowed
yeah.
to.
Like Kirby allotted him the page space to really, stretch out and make it dynamic looking. And you didn't get that in the previous issue. Those elephant panels, it was like two little panels that made up, a third of the page, as we established, we talked about in the previous issue, or as we talked about in the previous podcast. But this like Cyclops gets a whole page in this issue, where he's just cutting loose. And even when they try to stop him, like Quicksilver grabs him and tries to, subdue him, but you still can't stop the optic beams. And like even though he gets like
blast
pulled
the
back,
generator
he
and the
blasts
whole
through
place
the floor.
explodes.
Yeah,
And...
it causes like incredible damage. Cyclops.
No, it's cool. That
yeah.
whole sequence of like every panel, Cyclops' beam is cutting across the panel.
Yeah,
just kind of shows like it's this big powerful thing that like everyone's
scared of,
desperately trying to avoid.
Yeah. Magneto is the last panel of that page. Magneto is literally running out of the room. They're all scared because they hit what does he hit? The generator, and there's all these like cables and electricity flying everywhere, and they're all afraid. If the electricity hits them, they're doomed.
Right.
So Cyclops has potential for great damage as seen in this issue, and it is through that dread power of his that he's able to save.
Power.
He's able to save Angel and himself, and in doing so, knocks himself unconscious.
I love. So you see this in Stan Lee stuff, and I feel like it's been a while since I've read Claremont stuff, but it came up a lot then too. There was this constant theme of like the characters get tired.
Yeah.
So they'll do something cool, and then they're out of the fight.
They overexert themselves.
Right.
Like for some dramatic moment. Yeah.
Right. Like it's a very real danger. It's like a video game where you run out of
health bars,
endurance or whatever,
yeah.
And that means you got to wait a few minutes until you recharge.
But
it happens a lot.
That is a recurring thing in the X-Men.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a whole thing with like Xavier's training. Like, wasn't that a thing about exerting themselves too much in the danger room sequences?
Mm-hmm.
Pushing that's the whole thing of pushing themselves to their limits, because like you saw that earlier with Angel. Like you actually saw some training for Angel, which was just like an endurance training where it's just like fly out as far as you can and then fly back and I'll test your blood pressure. But that was the whole thing of like Professor X is pushing them to their limits, and that is kind of that is a recurring theme.
Mm-hmm. No, I appreciate it. I like that there are limits.
Yeah.
I don't know. I appreciate that it's not this endless kind of Dragon Ball Z-esque,
right?
Never-ending.
Like every time there's a stake, they just blow through it, and then it just gets escalating and escalating and escalating, and
right.
And there's no
sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes Cyclops gets tired and he's out of the fight.
Yeah.
Sometimes,
exactly.
He's got to tag out. So
I agree. It's another little like subtle layer to the storytelling that does kind of change the dynamic of the way these heroes act and interact with the action and the villains. I mean, even Professor X. Like let's talk about that. The dramatic moment with Professor X. So it's like the end of the issue.
Okay.
You have Magneto set up the bombs because it's plural. He set up one that was just going to kill the X-Men, like if they tried to get into the room, with the nuclear bomb that was going to blow up the whole island. Which I guess that's some good preparation on his part. I'll give him credit for that.
Give him credit for that.
Yeah. He knew. If we got a bomb that's going to blow up the island, but if anybody tries to enter the room, a smaller bomb will blow them up, and then the island will blow up. And Beast goes barreling through the door, or he's going barreling to the door, and Professor X using his not his psychic powers. I'm incorrect when I say that. His telepathic powers. It is ill-defined. I think you said that in the previous issue. Like Professor X's powers are a little ill-defined. It's just his powerful brain.
I think he just flings himself from the chair in this scene, though.
That's what it is. Yeah. No. He senses that there's a trap inside, even though there's like nobody. I guess Magneto is technically still in the room. So he senses that there's a trap, and yet he just literally like, through upper body strength, throws himself out of the chair, to knock Beast out of the way so that he crashes into the door and sets off the bomb and blows himself up. So Professor X literally jumps on a bomb to protect his X-Men, which is exactly what his dialogue says. I have no other choice, must protect my X-Men. That's how dedicated he is to his students. He jumps on the grenade.
Pretty dramatic.
It is. It is a really dramatic scene, and that is what knocks Professor X out of the fight, essentially. Like, he's alive. They make a point of saying he's still conscious, but he's delirious and he's lost his mental powers. You know, like I think this is the kind of thing you've been saying since the beginning of this episode. The stakes are high in this. More so than any of the previous issues. Even the first issue where Magneto was taking control of experimental rockets and, you know, going to fly them around and blow up cities. It still felt like Professor X was solidly, you know, in control of the situation, and he was just sending his X-Men to, you know, if they work together, they can solve the problem. But this one, Professor X is in the fray, and the villains get away. Like you said, there's no sort of like comeuppance. There's no justice is served panel.
Right. Yeah, it's. I like it because I want to tune in for the next issue.
I'm totally hooked.
Tune in. I want to pick up the next issue.
Exactly.
I want to know what's going on.
Like, you got to come back for the next issue, like to find out what happens to Professor X. You know. So
it's a little ill-defined, as you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you accept it. The bomb rattled him, and he can't use his powers.
Right. It was set up to kill anybody. It was a bomb set up to kill anybody who entered through the door. But Professor X, he's just rattled. Like even his clothes, like he's still wearing his suit. Like there's no physical damage from the bomb. He's just, you know, he's delirious and his eyes are glazed. And that's about it. It was a concussion, not so much a fiery explosion.
Yeah.
But still,
it establishes that he was willing to make a sacrifice, and there's been a loss, there's been danger. The X-Men are in a bad spot. They're going to have to push on without him.
Yeah. It's all pretty dramatic.
Wow.
And again, they would have all died had it not been for Quicksilver coming back to dismantle the nuclear bomb.
And yet he won't join them.
And his place is with the evil mutants, I think is what he says. But I to be fair to him, he is only with them out of respect to his sister. So there's that sort of like that familial deference, that loyalty to, it's clear that he has he questions Magneto's authority, but he also has this sort of blind loyalty to his sister, and since his sister is loyal to Magneto, that means he's going to try to go along with it as best as he can. But he still has his, you know, even he thinks certain things cross the line, like nuclear bombs.
Too much,
yeah.
Can't go nuking a small island nation.
Right, for, you know, no real reason. I mean, like Magneto...
and that's what bothered me, I think, about the issue, is that Magneto, the setup is good. I actually thought his taking over the island was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And then the fight is like, where were you, man?
Yeah, exactly. Like, his plan doesn't really make sense. Like, he took over the island, he let the X-Men onto the island... And then, as soon as they start fighting him, he's like, "Oh, screw this, nuclear bomb, we're out of here." You know, it's a little ill-defined, and we talk about that kind of fall back on this whole, like, it's a comic book for 8-year-olds in 1964. Those dumb kids from the 60s.
Are you saying we're being too pointed in our criticism as adult men in 2017?
Am I allowed to criticize this on the same level that I would criticize Alan Moore's Watchmen or I don't know.
You know, who's to say?
Like a Chris Ware comic. You know, we spent a lot of time talking about building stories. You know,
we did.
Can we talk about this comic on the same level? I don't.
Well, we certainly can.
We can, and I think you can, and I think you can still criticize all the silliness while still respecting it in the context of what it was, and you can point out that all the incredible things that it's doing really well
Sure.
in the certain context, you know.
Sure. Yeah, I absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm being a little cheeky, and
Exactly. Me too.
but yeah, we we're doing this because the X-Men have proven to be a lasting, interesting set of characters in comic book, and it's worth looking at the pieces that establish them.
Yeah, I think I have said before on at least one occasion that I think the X-Men is possibly the greatest American mythology ever created. So I do think that there's value to be had in kind of studying these old issues, and like you said, seeing where it came from, and what works, and the context in which it works, and the foundations of what started it all.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to like in these issues. I do think. I mean, I've said this before. I am somebody who just I like kitschy things, and I like reading old comics, and I'm somebody who likes children's entertainment. I like watching a lot of cartoons, I think a lot of value can be found in that. And so you can look at this as children's entertainment, for dumb kids in the 60s. No offense to all of you dumb kids in the 60s who grew up to be grandpas in the nowadays. But I think that these comics were incredibly progressive for the time.
Yeah.
And even challenging.
Sure. I mean, there's something funny about early Marvel comics, and it's been commented on many times. But despite being superheroes for kids, Stan Lee, though he has his missteps and his bad ideas, was throwing in more depth than your standard.
Absolutely. He absolutely was.
Cliche characters.
Like we talked about the Magneto Professor X astral plane mental battle. Like that's some heady stuff. That's real heady. And I think it's important. And add the little character motivations for Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, and you have something that I can see. If you're used to reading like the Superman comics of the time, and I don't mean to pick on Superman, because I don't even have a strong enough knowledge in the history to know exactly what type of Superman comics were happening at the time. But if you're at the time, if you're thinking of comics the way they existed in the 40s and 50s, like if you're thinking of like the old classic superheroes, like Shazam. I love Shazam, but I mean Shazam is a little orphan boy turns into a magic superhero who does the right thing all the time. It's a smart, it is a good comic, and there's value to be had in that, but it doesn't have necessarily the layers that these characters have in this book. And we may look back at it now and kind of chuckle at some of the kitschiness of it, or even some of the simplicity of it. But I think the context is important, and it's I've always said that there's incredible value in children's entertainment that can appeal to children without talking down to them.
I agree.
Without delivering something that adults think children should like. And I really think that the old Marvels, the 60s Marvels, achieve that. And I do think that there's a lot of things that were going on at the time. I think there was a desperation at Marvel. There was sort of like a cavalier attitude that Stan Lee had, where he didn't really care if they went over that well. There was this sense of that the company was going to fail, so Stan Lee might as well just write the kind of comics that he wants to write and stop trying to write what he thinks that the kids want to buy. And as a result, I think out of that came these comics, which are extremely appealing. They're extremely understandable on a child's level. but they're not too watered down. They're not, they do challenge a little bit, and I think that's important. I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry,
Yes.
I'll get off my high horse on that.
Yes. Ed McMahon affirmation.
Yes.
You are correct, sir.
Well, I could repeat myself some more when I talk about these sanctimonious concepts of children's entertainment. What I'm getting at is why Teen Titans Go is actually a great cartoon, and all you haters... No, I'm just kidding.
Whoa!
Although I do love Teen Titans Go. Just suck on that, all you Teen Titans fans. But that really is...
That's all Teen Titans fans. I can't address that.
I'm out of my
X-Men is my poison. I'm out of my league here.
Exactly, yeah. I'm with the X-Men. Teen Titans is not my thing. But... But I think we're, I don't know. I think we've said about everything that we can without, like, there may have been a few specific things in this issue that we didn't touch on, but I think that there was...
We got the big...
Yeah, we hit the big subjects, and it's a pretty, like, it feels like a full issue, Like, it feels really dense.
Mm-hmm.
And although I think the art still sticks to that kind of grid format that we complained about in the previous issue, it doesn't feel like... It still feels like Kirby's really kind of pushing it to its max. Like, it's still... Like, there's still some excitement going on. It doesn't feel as bland as the previous issue. Maybe it's just because I'm not impressed by the circus. I mean, maybe that's really what it comes down to, is I hate the circus. And, Lasso.
I think there's a little more variety in his panel layouts.
I think so too. Yeah,
I think there's a couple of more iconic, sort of show the character images.
Mm-hmm. We get some nice character close-ups.
Yeah.
Which it felt like everything in the previous issue was really distant, and we didn't feel like we were into the action.
Mm-hmm.
But this issue really gets in there.
Mm-hmm.
Good stuff. I don't know. Any final words you have on the on this issue, Alex?
I think we covered it pretty well.
I think so. I mean, so I'm trying to think. I guess
Magneto helmets?
No,
I
don't want to go. No, we did Magneto helmets for the first one. I was gonna say how many how many Quicksilver cowlicks would you give this issue? I don't know if it's strictly a cowlick, but that wisp of hair that he has.
It's like a hair antenna.
Yeah, his hair antenna. How many Quicksilver hair antennas?
Is there a name for that? Is that an actual haircut?
I think that's a thing that you can say about almost all of Jack Kirby's characters, or all of Marvel characters.
Yeah. Out of 5, I'm gonna give it an enthusiastic 3.5.
That's pretty solid. I was settling in a 3, but I can go for 3.5. Yeah. The Quicksilver hair horns.
Yeah, there we go. Quicksilver hair horns.
Yeah, I mean,
that's his thing. It's his look.
It's pretty solid.
Yeah.
Well, all right. I think that's gonna settle it for this issue. This issue definitely, I felt more enthusiastic, certainly, after reading this issue. Much more than the last one. So,
and I want to know what happens next.
Exactly. Like, we want to know what happens next. I think that's going to carry on to the next issue. So, we're going to commit to it. Next week we'll read issue number 5 and see where it goes. I mean, I don't want to cut into your comic book drawing time, Alex, because you got a lot of drawing to do still.
Yes, indeed.
But we'll save that for another podcast. So I want to thank everybody for listening. Alex and I had a great time talking about the X-Men. You can find new episodes of this podcast at comicdna.podbean.com, and you can find us on YouTube, our YouTube channel, Comic DNA on YouTube. And you can find me, Aaron Walther. I'm on Facebook. You can also find me on Twitter at AAWALTHER. That's AA Walther on Twitter. And you can read comics that I have written at www.thebirdlander.com and www.newhavencomics.com. Thanks everybody for listening, and we will see y'all next time.